Good afternoon, everyone. Hey. All right. So we're gonna get started pretty quickly here. Just we've got a full session today. My name is John Purkis. I'm the Director of Partnerships and Engagement with the Building Decarbonization Alliance. We have a number of participants who have joined, a few others who will be joining us as we go. I'd just like to welcome everyone to our session. This is our first Thermal Energy Networks Train the Trainer session, which we're co-hosting with Quest. Little land acknowledgement. So we acknowledge that we're gathered on the unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin people, which is where I am based in Ottawa, who've cared for and stewarded this land since time immemorial. The Ottawa-Gatineau region sits within the traditional territory of the Algonquin Nation, whose enduring relationship with the lands, waters, plants, and animals continues today. I think it's important too, as we gather in June, just to recognize that it is National Indigenous History Month in Canada. And I think there's lots of different things we do across the country to celebrate this history, heritage, and the resilience of First Nations, Innu, and Métis people. Here in Ottawa, where I am, we have a lot of different events, such as the Summer Solstice Indigenous Festival, programming led by the Indigenous Cultural Spaces Group, that offer meaningful opportunity to learn, celebrate Indigenous cultures, and build relationships. So wherever you're based, it'd be good to encourage you to check out the different festivals and activities that are taking place. I'll be sort of steering our ship today, and so I'm working with the Building Decarbonization Alliance, which is a nonpartisan cross-sector coalition and initiative of the Transition Accelerator. We're working to advance smart electrification as drivers of productivity, energy security, and competitive advantage for Canada. Together with more than 350 partners across the building ecosystem, we inspire, inform industry and government leadership, and accelerate market transformation. Thermal energy networks are a critical part of that mission by enabling buildings to share clean heat at the community scale. TENS complement electrification, reduce peak demand on the grid, and help make the broader energy transition faster and more affordable. In addition to that, the two projects that we've been leading, which relate to thermal energy, are noted up here. We have our TAF TENS project, which is what the training session today is about. We've started this project really to answer a couple of questions. What is the current state of play with thermal energy networks across Canada? Which TENS configurations deliver sufficient benefit to justify the investment, and where? And what decision support tools and draft policy should be developed to support industry and policymakers? So we are pleased to sort of dive into these and unpack them with you today. The second initiative, which is funded through NRCan's ORED project, ORED team, takes a deeper dive into two critical players, utilities and regulators. And here we'll be exploring where, when, and how existing gas, electric, and water utilities could play a larger role, and how provinces should mandate the regulators to oversee thermal energy. We have a wonderful technical advisory committee and a steering committee that have been guiding this work. Tanya Leach from Quest is one of our expert advisors, and I'd like to pass it over to Tanya at this point just to do a little overview of Quest. Tanya, over to you.
Super. Thank you so much, John. It's a pleasure to be here and really enjoying the partnership with BDA. So I wanted to thank everybody for taking the time to join us today. I think we've got a really wonderful session lined up for you, and excited about the work that will follow thereafter. For those who don't know Quest, Quest is a national organization. We've been around since 2007 as an independent, nonpartisan charity focused on practical outcomes. Our work is really focused on helping turn energy ambition into implementation. We work at the intersection of communities, Indigenous nations, governments, utilities, and industry, helping to align priorities and reduce barriers to action. Our role is not to build projects ourselves. Our role is to help create the conditions that allow for good projects and good decisions to move forward. Move on to the next slide, John. Thank you. So a few words about who is on the call today. You are joining us today because you are the connectors, the provincial, federal, regional champions who can bring TENS knowledge to the municipalities, utilities, developers, and community organizations in your own networks. This session is designed to give you the narrative, the tools, and the hands-on practice to do exactly that. As you can see, we've got participants joining us from across the country. If you can click that, John. With more representatives from Ontario and Quebec than elsewhere across the country. We also have participants coming from a variety of different organization types with a concentration in the NGO, consultant, and municipal sectors. On the intake form, and we thank you all for taking the time to fill that out, we also asked you for your goals in attending today's session. And the tribe has spoken. Your interests cover a number of objectives with a preference of us spending time on tailoring TENS messaging to different stakeholder audiences and navigating the use of BDA's TENS tools, how to use them for your own needs. We also asked about your breakout topic preferences and saw interest across the board with a little more emphasis on financing, developer, and project development and TENS technical fundamentals. We've
Great,
also,
thank you.
oh, sorry. It's okay. One last comment, John, and then back to you. We've actually used all of that input that you provided to refine today's session and brought different experts to the table to help with that, which you will get to meet them in due course. Back to you, John.
Wonderful. Thank you, Tanya. Apologies for jumping in.
That's all right.
So yeah, we have a fun and engaging session set up today. We have a number of experts that have brought to the table. Janice Ashworth from Dunsky, Herb Sincock from CCET, Lydia from City of Edmonton, Jason Owen from Corks, Patrick Moran from Mattamy Homes, and Jennifer Leslie from Sierra as well. And they'll be working through a series of different exercises that we've got planned. This is our agenda. I'm not gonna dwell on this, but there are a couple of different breakout groups that we have, so it won't be us only talking and sharing. We'll have space for you to have discussions with others who are here too. Just a couple of quick logistics before I pass it over to my colleague Orly. This is the first time that we're hosting this session. We've put a lot of effort and energy into designing it, but we do certainly welcome your feedback on the session. And we've got a quick survey at the end, and we'll circulate an email afterwards with a slightly longer survey. And we'd love to get your input on that. We do encourage questions throughout the session, so please do use the chat for that. We might not have time to answer all the questions, and we'll do our best to follow up afterwards as well with some additional information. And also, please note we are recording the session, including the first breakout room, but the second breakout group, which is a little bit more about some of your next steps, we won't be recording that. With that, I'm going to pass it over to my colleague Orly to go through some of our TENS fundamentals.
Thanks, Sean. Hi, everyone. So for those who don't know me, I'm Aurélie Vérin. I'm working as policy lead at the Building Decarbonization Alliance. And today I'd like to start by walking you through the fundamentals of TENS. So what they are, what you need to know before we take a deeper dive into the TENS resources and how we can tailor TENS messaging. So before we talk about TENS and why this matter, I just wanted to kind of have a common understanding here of what we mean by a formal energy network. So as you know, there are different types of TENS. There are fourth generation systems, for example, that we often call district energy systems. So they tend to be centralized, operate at higher temperature. They provide heating and cooling to different connected buildings. And you also have, on the other hand, what we call fifth generation systems, so often called ambient loops. And these are more kind of decentralized systems that operate at ambient temperatures and allow buildings to be both thermal sources and sinks. And so it's also important to know and to see that many TENS are actually hybrid systems that combine features of these different generations, depending on the local context, the energy sources in place, building types, and so on. And so it's interesting to see that, for example, a network can start with a conventional source like natural gas that then can enable to establish this distribution loop and anchor early demand, and that progressively over time that other energy sources can come in, such as waste heat recovery, heat pumps, and so on, and having this stage approach and enabling incremental decarbonization over time. And so at the BDA, we use thermal energy networks or TENS rather than district energy as our kind of umbrella term to define these different systems. So next slide. And I think, to start this session around TENS, it's worth taking a step back and to look a bit more where we stand today. So Canada already has a growing and largely municipal-led TENS landscape. Today, we do have more than 250 thermal energy networks that are operating across the country, particularly in urban centers, also northern communities. And nearly half of these systems actually serve institutions and campuses. So while TENS meet currently only about 3% of Canada's heating demand, there is really a momentum around this solution. And as an illustration, more specifically about 80 new projects that were developed since 2010. It's also interesting to see, you can go to the previous slide, John, please, to see that there is diversity in terms of implementation across the country. As you can see on the right side of the screen, there are obviously several reasons for that. One of them being the policy environment, which varies across the country. Depending on the province, TENS can operate more with regulated models or with more a market-led approach. And TENS, it's also good to know that they are increasingly being recognized as a viable pathways to decarbonization. And at this stage, I think it's important to know that the emissions reduction potential for TENS can vary, obviously, depending on the heat source. So networks that will rely on geothermal energy, waste heat recovery, and so on can really achieve deep emissions reductions, while systems that are still relying on natural gas will deliver more modest reductions, obviously. So there is really like some emissions benefit that can come from energy networks, and especially from recovering heat, for example. Next slide, please. And so why there is a growing interest in TENS, and not just in Canada, but also in other regions around the world. There are obviously, as you know, a lot of benefits associated to thermal energy networks, and through our research and interviews, they were falling into these four main categories. So first, and I mentioned that before already, is related to decarbonization, but with decarbonization at scale, more specifically. So rather than retrofitting one building at a time, TENS can really provide a platform for coordinated and long-term decarbonization across multiple buildings and across different users. And it's also a great opportunity regarding the grid relief. So by balancing thermal loads and reducing peak electricity demands, TENS can really help to ease and reduce the pressure on the grid, and also particularly during winter peaks, which is really critical, especially in some provinces like Quebec. And that can free up also some clean electricity to support electrification in other sectors. Third one is related to waste heat recovery. So whether it comes from data centers or wastewater systems and so on, there is really a significant amount of heat that is typically wasted. And there has been some studies and some maps put together around the potential around waste heat recovery. And TENS are really like one of the practical ways to capture and redistribute that energy. And last but not least, TENS can be seen also can act really as a transition pathway for gas utilities, and especially because TENS rely on many skills and infrastructure that gas utilities already have. So this can become, in this way, a pathway for gas utilities to transition from transporting natural gas to transporting thermal energy, which is actually also a trend that we can see increasingly coming in the US. Next slide. And so if TENS are so beneficial, we may ask ourselves, why aren't they everywhere already? And so three main barriers came up from our research and the work that was done regarding the literature review. So first, obviously, is related to the economics. So TENS typically require more upfront costs, upfront capital costs than a conventional gas-fired standalone system. So that has some implication not only for network operators, but also for developers who may need to make their buildings TENS ready and so on. But it's also good to know at the same time that once the network infrastructure will be on the ground, the cost of low carbon heating and cooling can be shared across the different buildings and amortized over decades. So that can ultimately translate into avoided capital replacement costs and more predictable operating expenses over time. Second barrier was related to the market uncertainty. We like to call it the kind of chicken and egg problem. So it's the connection between the developers that will need confidence that the buildings will connect, and also promoters and building owners that want to confidence that the network will be actually there. And there is also like an opportunity there in terms of early engagement, early commitment to really shape the network, to have some anchor customers and early adopters that can influence design decisions. And so first, the third one is related to fragmented governance, because as I'm sure you're aware, a lot of key players play a role while we're talking about thermal energy networks. And so these projects may stall if there's not a clear champion at the table driving the conversation and moving things forward. And we'll get back to that with the personas and the convening role, especially. And so, yeah, there is really an opportunity there to have some leadership and championship to help move the project towards. And that's also why education, partnerships, and capacity building is an essential piece of this equation. And also why we're having this session today. You can go to the next slide. And so how can we catalyze growth? Our white paper suggests a kind of a three-level framework. And you'll notice that the tools that we'll present afterwards can actually speak to these three. So the first is leveling the TENS playing field. So we're not saying that TENS should necessarily be favored over other solutions, but rather that there is really an opportunity to ensure that TENS can receive treatment that is comparable to electricity and gas infrastructure. The second one is more related to the opportunities for TENS to emerge. So we're aware that TENS might not be the silver bullet solution in every conditions, but it's also good to know what is their value compared to other decarbonization pathways, depending on local conditions. So it's really important to be able to identify where TENS can make more sense. And there are actually opportunities like integrated thermal planning that may help to guide and identify actually like these opportunities for TENS. And the last one is unlock TENS delivery at scale. So once these opportunities that I just mentioned have been identified, we also need the enabling strategies in place to move these projects forwards. So like connection bylaws, de-risking mechanisms, partnership, and so on. And so that's also like a key piece to help accelerate the implementation of thermal energy networks. And so now that we've covered the fundamentals, I'd like to turn to the resources themselves that have been developed. So one of the significant milestone of this project is this suite of practical tools that we've developed to help decision makers to help to move projects forwards. And actually each tool has been designed to answer like the different conversations that these different stakeholders may have. And so also I want to acknowledge at this point like the work that has been done by Dansky and East Coast Environmental Law, because yeah, they were both of them like really instrumental in developing these resources. And yeah, as we will introduce the tools themselves, I will make sure also to connect them with the different personas that you can already see here on the screen and that you'll hear from later in the session. So I'll start with the foundation, which is the white paper, which was released last September. So that's kind of really, as I just mentioned, the foundation of the entire set of tools that was released. So it covers many of the topics that we've just discussed. So what TENS are, the state of play in Canada, the different key barriers and opportunities, and also the proposed framework that I just went through. And alongside the report, we collected different case studies from across Canada, exploring some real world examples of successful models, also highlighting benefits and challenges. And so, yeah, I think like the link for that was just shared in the chat. And by the way, so regarding the different icons of the personas on the top, they actually represent different stakeholders that are involved in thermal energy networks conversations. So from the left to the right, you have the convener, the municipal champion, the thermal utility, the strategy partner, the developer, and the equity and community champion. So you'll hear perspectives from different of them afterwards. And so the white paper, going back to that, is really relevant to all these different stakeholders slash personas, and can really help to have a common starting point of conversation, especially for someone who is new to thermal energy networks. And I just also wanted to mention that the Green Municipal Fund has freshly released an excellent TENS guidebook that is focused on project development, and we can share that in the chat as well. And so rather than duplicating that work, we really want it to be complementary. And actually, we kind of added on top of what has been done in terms of policy, market development, and so on. And yeah, maybe so you just saw the four tools that came up from this white paper and from the conversation that we had. And so this next resource I'm going to talk about really briefly is the Municipal Policy Pathway Briefing. So it kind of focuses on one of the most common questions that we hear from municipalities, which is what authority do we actually have to enable or encourage TENS? So it walks you through the different municipal powers that may be available. So things like land use planning, buildings regulation, connection requirements, and so on. And it also provides a prototype policy and bylaw language that municipalities can adapt to their own context. So while the primary audience is municipal governments, this brief can also highlight opportunities for provincial governments to strengthen or clarify municipal authority where it's needed. And so in the end, it's really an interesting resource, especially for the municipal champion person, as you can see here. And if you're trying to understand what tools municipalities have available or how they can support TENS, a nice resource to look at. And now, I'd like to pass it over to Janice on the next tools, actually, and Janice Hashworth from Dunsky, who really led much of this work with her team and who developed like the few other tools.
Thanks, Aurélie. Yeah, thanks for doing a great introduction. I'll dive into a little bit here the tools that that we developed. I think someone else can advance the slides, right? Great. The first piece that we wanted to cover here is our policy toolkit. So the 5 impactful policy levers that we covered here, we had some targeted TENS policies, including the connection policies. And then we had some enabling policies, including thermal energy plans, the National Energy Code, municipal green development standards, and building emissions performance standards. So what the policy toolkit covers for each of these is, which is the lead government that would be responsible. In some cases, it's multiple levels of government that sort of hand off, as in the case of the building codes. The timing, when is the timing in terms of its relevance to the development of a thermal energy network? So what's that timing, relative timing, and then the applicability. So you can find in the toolkit, we think that the connection policy is really the most critical one, and it can take a few different formats, but that's really a municipal or regional tool. Typically, if the municipality is also the owner of the system or in the ownership structure. Typically, that's after a TENS area has been identified, when it's getting more into implementation, and then identified in the thermal energy plan. And I'll just touch on the thermal energy plan there. This is sort of a new emerging best practice to identify and do a scan of the whole region and really identify areas of priority for thermal energy networks to dig more deeply on a geographic basis. Also, again, typically done by the municipality as part of their land use planning, or can be done by a utility, which is more commonly the case in the United States, where gas utilities are being asked to perform these kinds of future of gas type scenarios or type planning efforts. The National Energy Code for buildings, that's first developed by the federal government, then adopted by the provinces, and then enforced by the municipality. So sort of a handoff there. It's updated every 5 years and covers the building, is building wide, or sector wide. So it affects all buildings and their ability to connect and leverage the thermal energy networks. We talk about some of the challenges currently and the assumptions around thermal energy networks and their sort of energy efficiency within that code. Municipal green development standards, obviously at the municipal level, and are relevant to new construction. So getting new construction to be more higher performing than the building code. And then building emissions performance standards, a relatively new and emerging piece that's for existing buildings. So one of the tools that's for existing buildings. And you can see along the bottom that we've got the rationale. We kind of go from rationale, impact, implementation, leading jurisdiction, and advocacy. So you can follow that through in that policy toolkit. And I guess I should point out too, this particular component of the toolkit is really is really targeting the municipal champion. So that's the persona that we're targeting here. Okay, go ahead to the next slide, please. Here we have a stakeholder map. So here we're identifying which stakeholders are the most critical at each stage of the process. And you can see we've got champion stakeholders in the sort of orange peach color, active stakeholders in black, and then gray are the passive stakeholders. For each of these, the phases, enabling, screening, developing, and executing. And this one really is relevant. This stakeholder map is relevant to all of the personas. So that's why we've got everyone listed here: the conveners, the strategy partners, the developers, the equity or indigenous communities. So you can see all the personas listed across the top. And the key stakeholders are along the side on the left, including all 3 levels of government, thermal utilities, existing gas and electric utilities, developers or building owners, and financiers. So they all appear in different phases. And this tool can be helpful to help plan things like stakeholder convention or convening, who should be around the table for which discussions and at which stage of the game do different players have the leading card there, or take the lead. Yeah, go ahead to the next slide, please. Okay, we have some additional chapters in the market development toolkit that really get into the details here. So this is for stakeholders who are moving further along in their the same. It's all the stakeholders really, but as you get to that next level of implementation. So here we have some chapters on how to collaborate with municipalities and utilities, existing energy utilities, like what are their organizational structures that are important, when to engage them, how to align objectives, really respect their constraints, and build that relationship of trust. We also have a section on business case considerations, and here we get into some of the details around the energy supply agreements and the various terms and technical provisions within them, some of the legal and risk management provisions. There's also a section in there on infrastructure agreements and cost recovery options. So trying to lay out all the different ways that different contractual arrangements which ways have been used across the country and across the continent, really. And then the final chapter I wanted to highlight is on rate structures. So there's, again, a number of different approaches that are used to setting the rates. And in some cases, they're comparing it to a business as usual. In some cases, it's really a building up of the costs to build to deliver. And there's various approaches to rate adjustments as well. So we wanted to just flag in this sort of visual at the bottom, there's one part, 2-part, and 3-part rates are used for different thermal energy networks in different applications. And it's important to compare the various costs and who bears them when you're comparing against the business as usual. So we see that's often a common challenge, that the apples to apples comparison is not factoring in all the apples on one side or all the apples on the other side. So we wanted to sort of show which costs are being offset by the thermal energy network and which costs would remain with the building owner in different types of applications of thermal networks, fourth generation, fifth generation, different arrangements or technical design. So this is kind of the cost structure and how it compares to the different implementation approaches to thermal networks. Okay, and next slide, please. Here we are getting into the opportunity scorecard toolkit, or element of this toolkit. We have a very simple flow chart that we think is relevant for some of the personas at the early stage. So we've got the strategy partner, the developer, or the equity or Indigenous community champion as identified stakeholders here. And this is a fairly simple way to just map through, do I have an opportunity here? Very high level. Yes and no questions probably won't take a lot of analysis. Then we get into the next slide on the next level of detail. This one here gives sort of standard thresholds for a viability screen. So you've got your must-haves at the top, you've got your bonus pieces at the bottom. The higher you score in this low, medium, high ranking system, the more likely it is that you've got a project. So here again, municipalities can use this when they're thinking about their thermal energy plans, or developers, or also Indigenous partners or equity partners can rank the opportunities here using a pretty high level, not a lot of data inputs to calculate. Then here you can see, the floor area of the new development is top of the list and the must-haves. The heating and domestic hot water load density also top of the list in the must-haves. Peak thermal energy demand per area, and then load factors. So you really need that density and that thermal demand. And then you've got some bonuses around urban density, load diversity, capacity of a thermal energy source, like a waste heat source, and then proximity to that thermal energy source. So those are kind of the bonus pieces. What we also have to accompany this is a much more detailed Excel spreadsheet that gets into more calculations once you sort of can screen and zero in on a particular area. The next tool that I didn't put on the slide deck because no one wants to look at Excel sheets on the slide deck, but it's available at the same link that John has sent, gets into much more analysis or granular analysis of which policy opportunities do you have within your jurisdiction? What type of buildings will you be connecting, that residential, commercial, industrial? Do you have any sort of large consumers like data centers or ice rinks or rec centers, that kind of thing? What climate zone are you in? Because that will make a difference. You have access to natural gas. What's the ratio of the price between electricity and gas? And then some other kind of customer types are part of that too. So that tool is also a really good complement to these earlier viability screenings for when you're getting a little bit deeper into the analysis, and it gives you a ranking. So it comes up with a scorecard and can allow you to compare one potential site versus another site for prioritization purposes. So that's a bit about the toolkits. Happy to answer any questions about them as we go through.
Thanks, Janice. I hope this overview of the TENS resources was helpful, but as many of you know, success with TENS is not only about having the right information and nice tools, but also it's about knowing how you communicate with the different audiences. So this is why actually we brought together different experts who each work with TENS from a different perspective. So we can get to the next one. So you'll hear actually next from Herb from the Center for Community Energy Transformation, speaking at the convening role and coalition building. Lydia from the City of Edmonton, representing the municipal champion perspective. Jason from Corix, who will speak from the strategy and project development lens. Patrick from Madame Homes, bringing the development perspective, and Jennifer from the Center for Indigenous Environmental Resources, who will speak to the equity, engagement, and community-centered approaches. And so if we go to the next one, before we hear from our speakers, I just wanted to come back really quickly to the personas that you've seen through the tools section. So each of our speakers represents one of these different key stakeholder perspectives in the TENS ecosystem. So the convener, municipal champion, strategy partner, developer, and equity and indigenous community champion. And as you listen, you may think about the audiences that you work with most often, and also how these testimonies might resonate with your own context. And so let's get it started with our first persona, so the convener. And so the core question for the convener is pretty simple. It's who do I convene first and how do I keep the table together? And so to explore that perspective, I'd like to welcome Herb from CSET. Herb, over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Yeah, so we all know that getting a thermal network off the ground is a genuinely hard task. And I think in some ways it's not for the reasons that people around us expect. I mean, we all understand the technology is proven. These days we have access to really unparalleled levels of private financing. And in a lot of cases, we're finding there's a degree of political will in the communities we're serving. And what I would say is slowing progress is something of, as Aurelie had described it, a chicken and egg problem, right? We've got maybe three parties attached together. And maybe if you flip to the next slide, you can kind of see a little bit of that, I think. Perfect. Really three parties there that are in a way just waiting for the others to make a move. So everyone's in this kind of waiting to move ahead posture. And I could pull on our work in Brampton as a bit of a thread. There we're trying to establish a district energy utility that's looking at a new secondary plan area, a greenfield area, very large with mixed use. And there's already a thermal energy utility mandate written right into the secondary plan for that. So this is about as good as a starting position we could get. And yet even here with that foundation, we've got the coordination problem that's illustrated on the slide. And here's what I mean by that. You've got a land developer who's needing to know that there's going to be a thermal network there and it's going to be operational at the time the buildings are ready to connect. And so without that certainty, they're not designing for it or they'll hold back on that. And they're not really willing to carry any infrastructure cost that relates to that in the pro forma. So already there's some reticence to move. The thermal energy network developer who's doing all the horizontal infrastructure, in some cases bringing the financing, planning to run the network, needs to know that those buildings are going to connect. And because, without that committed load, the business case begins to fall apart. So they're very critically looking at how do we ensure that connections happen. And both of those are in a position where they would like the host municipality to be really genuinely engaged, to bring the right policy frameworks, the right institutional posture, to be really signaling, particularly from the political level, that there's will behind it and they really want to see it move forward. So now each of the three waiting on the other two, and none of them wants to move first. That's the luck. And the job of an intermediary is really to break that. And we can't force commitments on people, and we certainly can't get them to the place they need to go before they're ready to get there. But I think one of the keys we can use to unlock is really think about the business planning that comes alongside these stakeholder conversations that we're having. So the idea is we're iteratively working our way through the business planning, and the act of building it is what's actually drawing each of the partners into the specific pieces of engagement they need. So the plan isn't really the key output of the process. It's a tool we're using to get that alignment of the partners. And now there's a very practical question asked here of, where do we start that? And I think what I would argue is that in practice, it's really the municipality that's first in the conversation. And that's not necessarily because we are expecting them to lead the project, but because without that signal of really genuine engagement on policy, neither that land developer or that thermal energy network developer operator is going to come to the table in a really serious way. And we've got to have that signal. And it means that the early work is direct engagement with staff. It's reports and delegations to the councils, it's workshops, it's hosting city events within the city with partners, and this very patient, sustained education that we've got to do until we start seeing that thermal energy network language show up in planning documents, in policy directions, in comments from council. Those, I would say, are the threshold. That's the point when now you've moved from that education mode into something more like feasibility. And it's a shift in role at that point for an intermediary to stop educating in a way, or maybe educate less, and really lean in on how do we sharpen the policy directions? How do we make sure that we've got a really good, structurally sound enabling framework coming together so that scaffolding's there? And then also bringing those very credible partners into the conversation at that point, ready to sit down at the table. And I'll just sort of put this one into the debate, maybe something for us to discuss today. We should talk honestly about the role of municipalities in this kind of conversation. I think it's a potentially misunderstood dynamic. We've got to have the municipalities. They're indispensable. They've got the policy levers, the land use authority, the right-of-way access, the legitimacy of the democratic process. And so obviously without their genuine engagement, we're not moving ahead. That doesn't necessarily mean that municipals need to be in the driver's seat as far as project development. We see from municipal characteristics, there's a structural risk aversion. It's part of what makes a municipality a municipality. The electoral cycles that can create prevailing changes of wind, right? Constraints in procurement, strong limitations in staff capacity and knowledge. There's just a lot to do in a given day. So they're not necessarily the best vehicle for all of the early stage development work that's got to happen in around that. And your private investors coming to it understand that dynamic. They want the municipal partner at the table. They also understand the potential volatility that comes with that. It's another place where an intermediary can really do a lot of work to create, again, that structural framework and a very safe, stable place for investment to happen and a partner to come together. And ultimately, that structural answer probably feels like something like a municipal services corp. We need something where that's arm's length. It's got some independence in terms of its board and management. It's more able to act at private sector speed, but it keeps that municipal authority and that public accountability in the frame. And at the same time, really gives investors that stability and the municipality a bit of separation that it needs. So that's the perfect vehicle for holding the project together as it develops. And an intermediary in the middle of that really isn't about developing and delivering the project directly. That's the job of a coalition that you're bringing together to do it. And ultimately, the job that the folks within the Municipal Services Corp would have to do. But the intermediary is a catalyst. It's a matchmaker. I sometimes say a conductor, not the musician, right? The orchestra is playing. The intermediary makes it possible for them to play together. So this is finding the right partners. It's sequencing those conversations, and it's holding the table together long enough so that delivery structure emerges and begins to stand on its own. And then just briefly, just a last point briefly that on community, because our residents and businesses, they're not here as the primary driver of your thermal energy network system, but an informed community is a serious political asset. When you've got a council priority that's shifting or budget cycles get to be difficult, your municipal champion is bolstered if the community understands the transition, if they understand and see district energy and thermal energy networks within it. So it's continued investment in that awareness as a bolster to that stability. So pulling it together, we've got this very real problem, this three-way lock. Everyone's deer in the headlights trying to figure out how to get going, but ultimately a governance design problem as much as it is coordination. You've got a municipality that can set the conditions. They're necessary, not sufficient. The arm's length delivery vehicle gives you that institutional sustainability that the private sector partners need. The intermediary is the catalyst that really kind of puts all that together.
Perfect, Herb. Thank you so much. That was super insightful and really set nicely the table for the convening role. Let's get to our next persona right now. So municipal champion, which is often asking, how do I enable TENS in my community without my municipality owning the infrastructure? So I'd like to invite Lydia to provide some perspective on that from the City of Edmonton.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Marley. And really appreciate the opportunity to speak here from this perspective. We'll note that the three-way lock that Herb was just describing is certainly something we've experienced and worked through. It has taken time, and I imagine you'll hear some similar sentiments in my comments as well. But maybe just bringing the conversation around Edmonton and what we've done. The starting point, really looking at greenhouse gas emissions. Buildings do account for approximately a third of Edmonton's GHGs, and district energy offers a pathway to decarbonize that may not be possible at the individual building level. And so we do have a district energy strategy in that we've identified 15 what we call opportunity areas, and those are depicted on the screen by the circles on the map. They're prime for district energy. Really, we looked at a variety of the pieces that I think it was Janice from Dunsky described from the scorecard, where we looked at, where is there existing or future planned density? Are there city anchor loads present? Is there proximity to local thermal energy sources? And that's really how we ultimately landed on the 15 areas. So this is the vision of a growing thermal energy network, district energy network in Edmonton, but it will take time. And in terms of the work that we've done in Edmonton, in 2019, the city started operating its first municipally owned district energy utility in the Blatchford redevelopment. That utility uses 100% renewable energy through a geo-exchange system. And then following that in 2025, the first phase of our downtown district energy initiative became operational. And while the utility is still municipally owned, it is delivered in partnership through a P3 with EPCOR, through a design, build, finance, operate, maintain agreement. The downtown utility is fueled by natural gas to start, with lower carbon sources planned to be integrated over time. And since then, our efforts have focused on the potential to expand into 2 more near-term redevelopments in River Crossing and Exhibition Lands. And we've completed feasibility work. We've completed some project delivery screening, so stay tuned. Next slide, please. Perfect, thank you. So yeah, just bringing it back to that question of how do I enable TENS in my community without, necessarily owning the infrastructure? It's a really great question. And honestly, we're not quite there yet in Edmonton, though we're certainly open to alternative ownership models. So as I mentioned on the previous slide, the approach to date has been city ownership of district energy utilities. That's primarily due to retaining the ability to drive and control greenhouse gas emissions reductions, but also to retain the authority to implement mandatory connection bylaws to reduce utility load risk in early stages of utility development. And so while there isn't a one-size-fits-all solution, these are some of those key ingredients to success. And I think it's been touched on in a variety of different, by a variety of different speakers already today. But under that umbrella of the local context, considering what statutory or council plans are approved, what policy tools are and aren't in municipal jurisdiction, the ownership and delivery structure that best fits the objectives while providing value for money, and identifying those key champions. So in terms of Edmonton, vision and mandate, we have a variety of plans in place, everything from our municipal development plan, what we call the city plan, which touches on greening energy systems, now bringing that to the community energy transition and district energy strategies, which really provide that implementation framework and direction alongside an approved capital budget to do that work. In terms of policy framework, we've recently completed a fairly comprehensive review of the full planning and development continuum in Edmonton, looking to identify how we can better integrate district energy, whether that be through enabling or directive policy language. So that's something that we will continue to explore and work on. Partnerships and relationships, in line with our district energy strategy, we have started to look at shifting the city's role, right? So from doing it all in Blatchford to, alternative delivery models. Fundamentally, the goal is increased private sector participation, innovation, risk transfer. But we do see municipalities and the City of Edmonton continuing to play a key role in the initiation of these systems. Finally, initiative champions. So, I think we've all talked about this, but really district energy utilities require buy-in from various interested parties or stakeholder groups. So thinking about the senior leaders, council, as well as the key parties that we would interact with external to the city. So especially important to have those key parties engaged, involved in support of the work, which in turn, and just thinking about council, there is a need to have that continued support past the 4-year elected term. And so having the memos to council, the regular check-ins through committee, implementing a communications and engagement plan has really been helpful from our perspective. And that's all for me. I hope that you found it helpful, and looking forward to continuing the discussion.
Thank you so much, Nida. I think that was really a great overview of the key ingredients that are needed for municipal champion to look and enable TENS in their community. So that's super helpful. So our next persona is the strategy partner, and with the core question being what makes a TENS project financeable, and also how to build a strong business case. And so, to help us explore that, I'd like to welcome Jason from Corix. Over to you, Jason.
Thanks, Aurelie. Hi, everyone. Jason Owen with Corix. So we're a district energy company. We're a developer of district energy projects and an owner and operator of multiple systems across North America. And in my role, I spent a lot of time evaluating different opportunities for district energy projects, of which quite a small number actually advance to sort of the project development stage, as refer to it, and then an even smaller number kind of move all the way through project development into commercial operations. So there's a fairly well-established set of kind of criteria that we think make for a successful project, and I'll try to cover some of those commercial metrics that are really important to the different stakeholders at the table as we're moving through a project development cycle. I'll speak a little bit about ownership models as well, and sort of the regulatory implications across those different models, and finish on sort of governance and scale questions. So from the sort of commercial stakeholder perspective, there's sort of 4 key players at the table as we move through a project development of a district energy project. I'll start with the developer, and in this I'm referring to broadly either the developer of a new construction project, or it could potentially be the owner of an existing buildings, but it's the decision maker who is going to determine whether this building will connect to this project. So starting broadly defined as the developer, first of all, we need to ensure that the project is able to meet their code requirements or any other potential energy emissions requirements imposed on those buildings. And some of the drivers beyond sort of those requirements for the developer would be, is this project going to save capital infrastructure cost on the first construction of the project? Is it potentially going to free up space in the project? Is it going to help remove complexity of complicated energy systems and code requirements? Will it reduce electrical demand and potentially reduce electrical servicing costs to the site, or free up capacity to enable the project to move forward where we have potentially constrained electrical grids? Will it provide marketing potential to their future buyers or renters that they're delivering a green or sustainable product? So these are all questions that I think are really essential to that choice of which a developer will be making about connecting or not connecting to a potential system. The next category, and there's a little bit of overlap in these two, would be the building owner. So sometimes that's the same as the developer. Sometimes that's a different party. It could be a strata that forms after the building is constructed and occupied, or it could be the same party that developed the project from the beginning. But the building owner has a much different perspective and view and time horizon over which their concerns are important. So typical benefits that can be provided to building owners are reduced operations and maintenance costs. So we're taking complex and capital intensive infrastructure out of a building and replacing that with more of an operational service. And so that then reduces the operator maintenance and really importantly avoid capital replacement costs. So especially in a world where we're looking at more complicated, be it heat pump systems or refrigerant driven systems, there can be very large capital replacement cycles on a long-term building owner that can be avoided with the district system. The third category would be the end user. So again, sometimes that can be the same as the building owner. But often there are multiple end users within a building, be it a rental building or a strata building or a commercial or institutional building. We have different types of users and different types of needs from a heating cooling perspective. So first and foremost, we need to make sure that those needs are being met in a reliable and resilient way over the life of the building, essentially. Very, very importantly is the rates aspect. So typically these systems are capitalizing or utilizing certain amount of infrastructure, and then that cost is being recovered over time through a set of rates. Much of that cost often is transferred to the end user in the form of metered energy services. And so the competitiveness of those rates and the affordability of those rates is really important for the long-term success of the project. And that's something we always try to bring into the project development phase, is a really clear view of the forecasted cost to the end user and, what are the drivers that could make that go up and down over time. Rate stability is really important in that as well. And that's one of the aspects that often come with these centralized systems, is the ability to sort of insulate large spikes from energy commodity prices. And so that's something that can be a benefit to the end user, but is often under recognized when we're looking at these concepts from the initial feasibility stage. And also the sustainability aspects or carbon emissions reduction can be really important to many users of these systems, and often it's not well known from individual occupant level. And the final stakeholder in this sort of commercial business case aspect is the utility itself. So that could be a range of different parties, but whoever it is, it's really important. And I think the previous speaker spoke really well to this aspect of the need for alignment across the partners, so across all these different stakeholders, and what I'll just speak from the experience of a privately owned utility company that our investor is a pension fund. And ultimately what they're looking for in these investments is low risk, stable returns. So these are generally benchmarked to other publicly regulated utility assets in terms of regulated levels of return that are benchmarked to the appropriate level of risk for that utility investment. And so those risks get stabilized or mitigated through long-term contracts or future plans that incorporate district energy requirements. It could be through other commercial means, but ultimately the ability to have certainty over customer load and ability to scale over time. So now that we've talked about the sort of key commercial stakeholders, I'd like to just touch on ownership models, because there's a range of different options, and I think that all the points I just made are applicable across all the different ownership models, but the different players at the table could be different depending on which ownership path is selected. So generally sort of a range between fully publicly owned, and there's many examples of those across the country, to fully privately owned with many more examples. then there's sort of the kind of middle ground of private-public partnerships, of which there's generally two sort of well-established models. What could either be a concession model where there may be a public entity, a municipality, or another public institution that retains ownership over a utility asset and partners on the financing, the construction, the delivery, the operations with a private utility over a long-term contract. Or there's more of a franchise model where a public institution, be it a municipality or otherwise, could establish a service area for district energy system and essentially offer up that franchise to a private utility to take to deliver the utility services. Across those different models and across different jurisdictions, the regulatory implications will vary. I won't get into that in a lot of detail here because it's probably a much longer conversation, but generally speaking, those three models will work in all jurisdictions, whether thermal energy is regulated or not, but the actual contractual and regulatory oversight of operations rates and financial investments will vary depending on the jurisdiction. And finally, I'll just touch on governance scale. So what I mean by that is really what are the governing factors driving the implementation of a district energy system, and that could be a range of different things depending on who the sort of catalyst is for the system development. So that could be, similar to the city Edmonton, the municipalities is a catalyst for delivering district energy in various locations within the city, and really seeking to establish community scale district energy deployment. Yes. On the smaller end of the spectrum, you might have systems that are really just isolated to the boundaries of a commercial development. Could be a single site or multi-site master plan development, in which case it's often the developer of that, the land use developer that might be setting the requirements or setting the conditions and objectives that will be delivered through district energy. I think the key point here is regardless of where that governance lies, the scale is really defined by by who's setting the terms of the governance. So in the condition of a district scale system, a community scale system, it really generally to achieve scale will require some involvement from the authority having jurisdiction. So in most cases, that's the municipality, whereas smaller scale projects are certainly viable without that sort of high level direction or governing authority. But it would be limited to the boundaries of which the land ownership is tied. So depending on the scale of the outcome that's targeted, different levels of governance will be necessary. And I think with that, I'll leave it there. Yeah.
Perfect. Well, yeah, thank you so much. That was a great overview of what it takes essentially to move a TENS opportunity from concept to a viable project. So thanks for that. Moving on to the next one, the next persona. So for developers, the core question is often pretty straightforward. So will TENS pencil out for my project, and how also a builder thinks about this system. So I'd like to welcome Patrick from Mattamy Homes to share his perspective on that. Patrick, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks, Sophie. So today we'll go over a little bit of quickly who Mattamy is, just to give some perspective into where we operate and what are some conditions we operate under. If you want to go to the first slide. And sorry, the next one as well. So Mattamy Homes, we're North America's largest privately owned home builder. We're also Canada's largest home builder, where we've built over 150,000 homes. 33,000 of those in Canada have been Energy Star certified homes. We've also done approximately 1,600 net zero ready homes. And we've delivered keys over to about 2,500 total homeowners using geothermal. 1,500 of those are on multi-story or mid-rise condo buildings, and 1,000 of those actually are on low-rise. So we've got a mix of both and some good perspective as to how developers think, what's been successful, what have been some of the challenges and some of the lessons learned. I just entered in the chat as well. I'll briefly touch on it today, but if it's something that you're definitely interested in, specifically on the low-rise side, there's a webinar tomorrow that we're hosting with our geothermal utility partners, so you can find the information there. So next slide, please. So ultimately, when we're evaluating any type of project, we come across the challenge of being able to provide affordable housing, which is definitely really the number one priority right now when we're looking at sort of the market dip that we've been in is really centered around affordability. But when you move past that, you need to provide homes that are desirable. We also want to provide sustainable homes and homes that'll last a long time and that homeowners are able to live in relatively easily. And what we mean by that is, what they're accustomed to in terms of whether it's heating and cooling or how they operate or live within their home. And the challenge with that is when we first brought geothermal to the table, with our board of directors and our owner, there's a lot of flags that go up around it, specifically costs. Is it easily integrated into a production schedule without extending that timeline? Do homeowners actually want it? Those are all things that really we came up against. And what we really leaned on as to why geothermal. For us specifically here, we operate in Canada, at least in Edmonton, Calgary, Ottawa, and then the Greater Toronto area. But our geothermal program right now has predominantly been in Ottawa and Toronto, and that's because of the clean grid advantage. We, at the end of the day, are after decarbonization, and that can be through operational carbon savings or embodied carbon savings. So for us in Ontario here, the best dollar per ton we found is through electrification, and geothermal provides that for us. Just some added context. In Alberta, we've been chasing solar currently, and then once we have that figured out, I think geothermal can definitely find a pathway there. But for us here, it's been about really electrification. And at the scale that we operate, so in the GTA last year, we closed about 2,000 low-rise homes. So we have the opportunity to have a pretty significant impact on delivering homes for homeowners that are energy efficient, that are low carbon, and that are future ready as well. So for us, geothermal has been able to provide that. But with that being said, there's been a lot of lessons learned along the way, and sort of being the first and really the only developer doing this regularly at scale, there wasn't a playbook before. So we've had to really lean on our network of trades and experts to really craft the solution. And this is why we do talks like this and talks tomorrow is, we need followership within the developer market. We've proven out the use case for it and the business case. And, for us right now, it's relatively small, but through conversations like this, there's definitely an ability to really scale this rather quickly and to tap into the tens as well. If you want to go to the next slide. So a little bit more about our journey and where, some of the things that we've learned is we started our first geothermal community on a district system. And for a lot of the reasons that were brought up before, we've moved away from that since then. And it's not because the technology doesn't work. It's ultimately a lot of the other things that, Herb and Jason were talking about was we're ready to move at a certain pace as a developer. And that district system took longer in municipal approvals and right-of-way access and design and all these additional costs up front. It took longer to get that figured out and design the system than it did to build the entire system and build all the houses. So for us, that's the challenge is really the infrastructure that goes along with it's not currently set up to move at the pace that we would like to move to deliver houses to homeowners. So we started with the district system, and since then we've moved to an individual borehole per home system. And there's a few reasons for that is one is we are doing this without government grants or funding. And we work with our geothermal utility partner, who's privately owned, to deliver these at a cost where homeowners can own and operate it at the same cost as a code-built gas furnace air conditioner house. And that's our target is because homeowners aren't asking for it, and the sustainability pitch to a homeowner is rather weak in this world of, the affordability crisis that we're in. We have to deliver it where the homeowner's not out of pocket. And in order to do that, we need to keep it as simple as possible. And for us, it's individual borehole per home systems. And one of the main drivers to that is we can drill essentially the week before we start construction. So from a capital expense, we're tying that as closely to our first revenue stream, which is essentially the first month after they close and move into the house. So that time frame allows us to cut costs or keep costs down. And then also the individual borehole per home system reduces, ambient loops and other kind of expensive infrastructure that can add to the cost. The other piece is, and was mentioned around having load diversity and having other buildings around. The reality of when we build our typical low-rise communities, or it's in a suburban area, we're typically the first to build. So there isn't really any other adjacent buildings that will be coming online anytime soon. So again, carrying that cost up front, which was mentioned earlier, can be quite prohibitive and oftentimes leads to higher rate for homeowners, which is back to the affordability piece. So that's really why right now we're in the individual borehole per home design phase. But that's not to mean that in the future, TENS and other district systems are, we're building these that are able to tap into it. It's just for cost reasons right now, we're in that individual borehole per home design phase, and we're proceeding with that in the near future. Next slide, please. So some of the things that we've learned along the way is ultimately the technology is not the hard part. And I think, groups like this probably recognize that, but the biggest challenge for us is around integrating it into our construction. So, coordinating borehole designs, lateral installations, going into our operations side on the utility, servicing it, the warranty, the long-term ownership models, figuring that out as well. And then for homeowners, I think one piece that we overlooked when we started was specifically around geothermal, but just any new technology in general is the education piece and the knowledge sharing with homeowners about how living with a geothermal ground source heat pump is quite different than a furnace. You'll get your heat, you'll get your cooling, but just how you interact with it and the implications of thermostat setbacks and filter changes and all these things can lead up to a homeowner that may have a negative experience with it, and that detracts future homeowners from buying, but it also detracts us internally from pushing more adoption and more scale if we're not doing that right on the front end. So I think anybody that we talk to, the homeowner piece becomes quite critical on making sure that we educate them on the differences and level set with them how to really operate and live within their home. And then the last one around, that commercial aspect, again, around the utility structures, ownership structures, risk allocation, those are all important pieces. But it's important to note that, the industry itself, specifically the geothermal industry, always focuses on, borehole designs, optimal design, heat pumps, but it really comes down to solving all these other things for other builders and making sure that they're aware of all this before they jump into it. Because what we learned is we've been lucky and we've had a long runway because our owners committed to carbon reduction and sustainability. But a lot of other builders that might be jumping on this for the first time, you have one crack at it with them. If it's not successful, they will not do it again. So all these things are really important to kind of hash out beforehand when we look to onboard new developers. Last slide. So to kind of wrap it all up in terms of, what do we as builders and developers need to say yes? Again, we don't buy the technology. What we're looking to buy is really cost certainty for us as a builder, for our homeowners on the carrying costs and the operating costs. And, builders aren't looking to make risky decisions, especially in this market. And what plays into that is making sure that it's not extending the production schedule time. So as I mentioned, our first project with all that upfront planning and scheduling, big detractor for future developers. So what kills it is just the project economics, the construction schedule impacts, and then that homeowner experience again, which comes back to education. And then what can close it is a compelling business case. Can I deliver that house at the same price that I could a code-built home with a gas furnace and an air conditioner that's on its own simple system? And then just that reliable long-term customer support as well, because what will sink geothermal or any other new technology is a negative customer experience. So yeah, to kind of leave it with basically a geothermal project isn't necessarily the most efficient or the most intricately designed project. It's ultimately something that can be repeated over and over and over to really drive scale. And that's something that we're really trying to accomplish and help other developers jump on board as well. So that's it. Yeah, thanks for letting me speak today. And if there's any other questions, or you have more information or need more information, the webinar tomorrow will definitely be a little bit more in depth on that aspect.
Exactly. Thanks, Patrick. Yeah, that was really interesting to get the developer's perspective. So thanks a lot for that. And last but not least, last person now. So the Equity and Indigenous Community Champion, where core question is usually how do we design tents so they serve communities historically left out of energy transition. So Jennifer from here is going to walk us through some perspective on that. Over to you, Jennifer.
Thanks, Aurelie. It's great to be here sharing from this perspective today. Before I dive in, I just wanted to share a little bit about SEER as an organization, just to kind of set that context of the kind of projects we work on and where our experience lies. So SEER is Canada's first Indigenous-directed environmental nonprofit charitable organization. We were founded around 30 years ago by 8 First Nations chiefs from across Canada. And we've worked on hundreds of projects with over 300 Indigenous nations across Canada since our inception. And all the work that we do supports Indigenous people and communities in becoming leaders of positive environmental change. And we focus on 4 main thematic areas, those being climate change, water, biodiversity, and energy. And next slide, please. So before I start getting into this a little more, I just wanted to acknowledge that all the perspectives I'm sharing today are from someone who works for an organization that works with Indigenous communities, not from community perspective itself. But historically, many energy projects have been designed around urban or utility scale priorities first, with Indigenous and remote communities being brought in more later as places where the technology is deployed. And that can create a pattern where communities are consulted after key decisions have already been made. So it kind of creates this problem where they're not involved in actually shaping the project or deciding what success can look like. So for TENS, this kind of history matters because if a project begins with that assumption, then it can repeat kind of past habits of outside-led infrastructure development that doesn't necessarily serve the communities in the long run. So a more equitable approach for us means involving communities before the technical solution is fully designed. So that allows the communities to bring in their priorities and capacity, as well as their long-term goals that can help shape the project from the start. So from an Indigenous organization's perspective, we think that the starting point shouldn't be where can we install this system? It should more so focus on what does the community actually need and how can this support their long-term vision? And that means taking the time to build those relationships early on before defining the full project scope, and ultimately understanding the community and engaging them meaningfully and often as decision makers to help guide the project and help give that lasting value. And lastly, a TEN project should create space for community leadership from the beginning, and not just leadership, but also technical staff, band members, and anyone who's going to be involved with a TEN project. But they should be included in decisions around ownership, governance, benefits, risks, and how the system fits within their broader community priorities. And next slide, please. So TENS can serve as a really good pathway to energy sovereignty for many nations. So for Indigenous and remote communities, energy sovereignty isn't just seen as a technical issue. It's often tied to housing, affordability, their infrastructure, economic development, and also their climate resilience and self-determination. So TENs can support energy sovereignty when they help the communities have more control over how their energy is produced, how it's distributed, how it's governed, and how it's maintained as well. So this could mean exploring different community ownership models, training local operators, creating employment opportunities for locals, and also ensuring that savings are reinvested locally. And it also means, very importantly, being honest about capacity. A system that requires specialized maintenance or complex financing, or even heavy outside expertise might not actually serve the community well in the long run, even if it looks really good on paper or runs smoothly right off the bat. That's something that we have seen a lot when it comes to any kind of project, but especially these kind of technical energy projects, where a good project is set up and there's a strong business case for it. But if the community doesn't have the capacity to operate or maintain it in the long term, things can kind of deteriorate and you don't get that lasting value. So the goal should be to design TENs that leave communities with more knowledge, more control, and ultimately more options than they've had before. And next slide, please. And something else I wanted to touch on when it comes to this kind of work is designing communities that fits different community realities. So one important distinction between a TEN project that is simply located in a community versus one that's actually community-led. You might see a developer-led approach begin with the technical opportunity, for example, where the infrastructure could be installed or where there's a good business case or a promising energy source. And those pieces definitely matter, but in our kind of line of work, it definitely can't be the only starting point. So we also need to think about things like the climate of where these communities are, the remoteness and how that affects things like setting up the infrastructure, operating the system and maintaining it, and things like construction, operation, and maintenance costs themselves. And then we also need to think about stakeholder dynamics and local governance models and the state and readiness of current or planned infrastructure. So asking those questions like who owns these buildings, who pays the bills, who operates the system, and who carries the risks if costs increase or the equipment fails. So those questions are going to help us build an understanding of how we can design a TEN that's really tailored to the community, and then also help ensure the long-term success of this project. And I have a couple of examples of kind of community-led projects that have been successful, although of course there are many other examples. One of them here is the Uje-Bujimu Cree Nation in Quebec. They have a community-owned biomass district heating system that serves most of the buildings and homes in the community. The important thing there, though, is that it was built off of community energy priorities that were previously determined. And this project has been running since, I believe, 1993 successfully, and it's been serving about 75% of the community's heating needs. And then you have the Northlands Dene Suline First Nation in Manitoba. Different context in the prairies. They're a remote northern community, so they were previously heavily reliant on fuel that was trucked in over their winter roads. And one of their main priorities was strengthening their community resilience and becoming more sustainable in the long term, not just about decarbonizing heat. So they were able to set up a bunch of different energy-related projects, including lake-based geothermal, biomass heating, and solar, to help them kind of build their own community resilience and local employment while helping them transition off of trucked-in fuel. So ultimately, designing TENs equitably means recognizing that each community is in a different region, in a different place, in terms of their governance and capacity, and also their relationship to the land. So these kind of TENs designs need to be flexible to adapt to those realities. But that's all I have for now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. And I think that was actually a really nice closing and powerful reminder that successful TENS projects actually are not just about technology, policy, and economics, but also about relationships, trust, and ensuring that communities can share benefits. So thanks for that. And I suggest we get to our breakout discussion. And actually, we kind of went a little bit over time, so we kind of readjusted the timing for the rest of the session. So now that you've heard from the 5 different personas, we'd like you to have the opportunity also to continue that conversation. So we're now going to move to this breakout discussion. So you'll be able actually to choose from 5 rooms, so one for each speaker. And you can choose the room that either best reflects the stakeholders that you're trying to engage or one perspective that you'd like to learn more about. And this is going to be an opportunity to ask some follow-up questions or discuss some challenges that you'll encounter in your own region or own situation. So we'll spend the next 10 minutes in breakout discussions before getting back in the group. So we'll just
Hi, are we in a breakout group? No.
You can select which breakout group you want to be in.
Oh, very good.
Should let you choose.
How do we choose, Noreen?
It should be a pop-up that lets you pick. Is everyone able to see that? I can also manually put you into the groups.
Yeah, I don't see anything popping up at all, no.
Okay, maybe it has to do with an update. If you're not in a group, could you just put in the chat which group you want to be in, and I can put you in there. As a reminder, group 1 was the conveyor, group 2 is the municipal champion, group 3 is the strategy partner, group 4 is the developer, and group 5 is the equity indigenous community champion.
I just want to point out that at the bottom there's like a whole bunch of like options. If you go to the more option, there's I believe join breakout room.
Thanks, Norma.
Might be it there.
That's working.
Okay, awesome. And if it's not working, you can put it in the chat. Awesome. Renee, is it not working for you? Oh, great. Awesome.
Okay. So I'm just going to wait for Orly to come back and join us, but I know that was a short discussion in your breakout groups, but I hope you're able to get a couple of questions in. There may be a sec while I get my screen shared again for everybody. Okay, so our next portion here is sort of unpacking how we can facilitate effective thermal energy network conversations. And I'm going to pass it over quickly to Tanya to go through this next section.
Super. Thanks, John. I'm going to move fairly quickly in this section just because we want to make sure that we end on time today. And this is actually really timely coming out of the breakout room that I was in as we were sort of starting to talk about some of this. So how are we supposed to facilitate effective conversations around thermal energy networks? I think we maybe need to acknowledge that when communities first encounter thermal energy networks, there can be a tendency to jump really quickly towards solutions. But the most effective TENS conversations don't begin with a decision to build, they begin with a decision to explore. The goal of a TENS session is not to determine whether a project should proceed, it's to help participants understand whether a thermal energy network deserves further consideration in their context. That means identifying opportunities, understanding who needs to be involved, surfacing information gaps, and determining what should happen next. So if participants leave with greater clarity and a credible next step, the session has been successful. Let's move on to the next slide. One way that we have found helpful to structure TENS conversations is through what we're calling a yes ladder. The basic idea is that you're moving the parties through a series of smaller decisions that lead them to the solution. This is effectively the same thing as Amazon does with you, reducing friction at every step. They position around the problem you faced, access to everything you needed all in one place, the department store of your dreams. They had you sign up, which was the first easy step. Then, based on what you were looking for, they offered suggestions about what you might like. And then you made a purchase and it arrived on your doorstep the very next day. Then you joined Prime so that you would have free shipping. And then all of a sudden you have access to movies and music. You bought in small incremental yeses. And this is exactly the same principle. You are walking the customer through a journey to a solution that they didn't know was the right fit for them at the outset. So when it comes to thermal energy networks, this is sort of looking at it, the structure is more around, is there a challenge that's worth addressing? Could a shared thermal solution help? Are the right people involved? Is there enough readiness to justify further exploration? And if so, what should happen next? The role of the facilitator isn't to get the participants to a particular answer, is to help them answer the next question they are ready to answer. So the BDA resources that have been shared with you earlier can support different stages of that journey, and I'll touch on where some of those resources fit as we walk through the ladder. Next slide, yeah. Then first step is understanding whether there is an opportunity worth discussing. Most opportunities emerge because something else is already happening. A community may be growing, a district may be redeveloping, major equipment may need replacing, infrastructure investments may already be planned, a utility may be facing capacity constraints, a community may be pursuing resilience or energy sovereignty goals, as we heard earlier. The facilitator's role is not to introduce a thermal energy network. The facilitator's role is to help participants identify where existing challenges and opportunities may create conditions worth exploring. Next slide. Once the challenge, next slide, please. Yeah, thank you. Once the challenge has been identified, the next thing to recognize is that not everyone around the table sees that challenge the same way. The challenge may be shared, but the perspectives, however, rarely are. Municipality may be thinking about growth, infrastructure costs, and public assets. A utility may be thinking about system capacity, reliability, or load management. A developer may be focused on project economics and servicing costs, as we heard earlier. A community organization may be focused on affordability, resilience, or local benefits. None of these perspectives are wrong. In fact, understanding these perspectives is often what helps move a conversation forward. One practical facilitation technique is to listen for what each stakeholder is trying to achieve before discussing thermal energy networks. If you can understand their objectives, it's much easier to connect the discussion to their interests. This is also why the personas we explored earlier can be really helpful. They remind us that stakeholders don't enter the room asking the same questions. Good facilitation helps participants see both their own interests and the interest of others. And when that happens, it becomes easier to identify opportunities that create value across multiple objectives rather than serving just one stakeholder group independently. Next slide. This is often the point where TENS properly enters the conversation. The question isn't whether a thermal energy network should happen. The question is whether one deserves further consideration. Exploring the local conditions is an important step here. You need to ascertain if the conditions for a TEN exists. This is an important step because it also leads to the next rung on the ladder. This is also where BDA's overview materials and case studies become immensely useful. The overview materials help establish a common understanding, and the case studies help participants understand how similar opportunities have been approached elsewhere. The goal is not to prove that a 10 is the answer. The goal is to determine whether it belongs in the solution set. Next slide. Many promising opportunities never move forward because the key actors are missing from the conversation. A strong opportunity with weak stakeholder engagement often stalls. Likewise, a strong opportunity with no organizational capacity may not be ready to advance. This is where BDA's opportunity scorecard can help. It's not a pass-fail assessment, but is a structured way to explore whether some of the ingredients that support successful projects may be present. One practical sign of readiness is when participants are willing to commit time, information, or resources to learn more. Next slide. As many of you know, one of the most important concepts in facilitation is the next credible step. Not the final step, just the next step. This is what our healthcare system excels at. Someone facing a health issue isn't told all the steps at the outset. They're informed of the next important step in their recovery process. It is the same in this circumstance. Communities do not need all of the answers before moving forward. They need enough confidence to justify the next piece of work. That might be a feasibility study. It might be stakeholder mapping. It might be deeper understanding of the policy barriers or market conditions. And again, BDA has procured resources that can help communities determine what that next step should be. On this slide, we've given you some questions that you can use to move the room forward. Notice that these questions are exploratory rather than persuasive. They're designed to help participants discover opportunities, identify gaps, and determine what they need to learn next. In many cases, the most valuable outcome of a session isn't an answer. It's the better next question on the pathway to a full-scale yes. Next slide. BDA resources are most effective when they're matched to the question the community is trying to answer. Different resources become useful at different stages. The facilitator role is not to walk participants through every tool. It's to help them identify the next question and connect them with the resources that can help answer it. So we put together this very simple table as a means to help you identify what tool to use at what point in the yes ladder. And I don't think we said at the outset, but these slides will be made available to you after the session. Next slide. So throughout this presentation, we've talked about helping communities move from awareness to informed exploration. By working through the questions in the yes ladder, participants can begin to identify where opportunities may exist, what barriers still need to be addressed, who else should be involved, and what information is still missing. As facilitators, we don't need communities to leave with all the answers. Instead, we want them to leave with a clear understanding of their local context and a shared sense of what should happen next. In some cases, that next step may be an opportunity scan feasibility study. In others, it might just be bringing additional stakeholders into the conversation or gathering more information. All in all, the most successful sessions create enough clarity and momentum for participants to continue the conversation in a meaningful way, regardless of whether that ultimately leads to a 10 or another solution. After all, the most important outcome is clarity and buy-in on the pathway forward, and a willingness and a preparedness to take action, not which technology they choose in the end. So that was really quick. We're going to move into our second breakout discussion because I think it's important for everybody to have more time to connect. So I just wanted to share that this time we've actually placed you based on your geographic location, your sector, and your interest into specific breakout groups. This session, unlike the prior one, will not be recorded, so feel free to share your thoughts candidly with the group that you're meeting with. So over the next, I think we've shortened this session down to about 7 minutes. We ask that you share among your group what has resonated most for you today and what you can see yourself bringing from this session into your work. We've also provided 2 additional questions to help generate useful dialogue in your group. What else do you think is needed to support a 10 discussion? What indicators might you be looking for to feel confident that your audience is ready to say yes to a 10? There will not be any reporting back from this breakout session, but we will have a brief poll to capture your thoughts when we bring you back to plenary. And with that, I think we can move into the next section of breakouts.
I kept everyone that's in here unassigned, but if you want to pop into a breakout room, feel free to do so.
Perfect. Thanks, Noreen.
Good job, team. This is great. This is really good.
Yeah.
Are we
Thanks,
still
Tanya, for
recording this part?
Oh, I'm going to pause this part. Sorry about
that's
that.
okay.
I can just edit this out.
Need some music in the background.
We do.
There we go. Lots of lovely faces. Welcome back. I hope you had a nice conversation with your colleagues. Always lots to learn, and it's amazing how much activity is taking place across the country. With just a couple of minutes left, I just wanted to really say thank you for your participation today. Thanks to our team as well for this first TENS Train the Trainer session that we've delivered. So on behalf of BDA Quest, we again appreciate your questions, input, and time, especially of those from the panel experts as well. I think one of the things that we would like to do just before we close is have a short poll. Always curious to hear and get some initial feedback while it's fresh in your minds. We will also follow up with an email as well. So we'll just open that poll now as I'm closing off my comments here. So a special thanks to Janice for helping with the presentation, to her, Lita, Jason, Patrick, and Jennifer for sharing your thoughts and expertise so generously with the group. And to my colleague Orly for all of her work in setting up today's session and leading us through the content. And also to Tonya and the team at Quest, especially Noreen, for helping in the behind the scenes to keep everything on track. The knowledge, tools, connections you're taking with you are the next link in the chain that we've talked about. And we genuinely believe that the conversations that you go on to have in your regions and networks will help move the thermal energy networks forward in ways that matter. I'm going to pass it over to Tanya just to say a couple of final comments as well, since we've got a little bit of time left. You're just on mute, Tanya.
I'm searching for the QR code to be able to respond to the poll. So I just want to say quickly, if anybody's figuring out how to do the poll, click get QR code and then use your phone. If you have one accessible to you, you can pop up the and answer the poll on your phone. If hopefully that's helpful. But yes, I wanted to just reiterate my thank you to Building Decarbonization Alliance. I really think that the work that they have done is incredible. And part of what sometimes frustrates me, but I also see as an opportunity, is just breathing life into really fantastic work that has been done. And I think more of our organizations need to do that. We see lots of kind of, trying to do the same thing over and over again in different jurisdictions and different places. And so the more we can bring people together around really great both research and useful tool sets, make sure that they are being used, the better off I think we all are. John did a very brief thank you to those that joined us as personas. I want to reiterate that and call them out. So Herb, Lydia, Jason, Patrick, and Jennifer, really appreciate you sharing your experiences. I think and your expertise. I think it's really important to bring this real world complexity of TENS together and make sure that we're understanding how it's seen from different perspectives. It is with that we are able to find pathways to move forward. So thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate the opportunity of partnership and being able to deliver sessions like this in partnership. So just wanted to say one last thank you. Thank you to all of you for your participation. And we will be making all of this information available to you following this session. So thank you very much. And perhaps we will run another one. And if you thought it was valuable, maybe you could provide us with some suggestions of who else you think we should be sharing this with. With that, anything last word, John?
Oh, that's great. Thanks, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day.